Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
Welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast. I'm your host, Carolyn Woodard, and today I'm talking with Ian Gottesman, the CEO of NGO ISAC. Thank you so much for being willing to do this with me. So do you want to introduce yourself and what you do?
Sure. My name is Ian Gottesman. I'm the CEO of the NGO ISAC. The NGO ISAC is a non-governmental organization information sharing and analysis center. So we are a community of nonprofits that helps each other with cybersecurity. And kind of, we have a very broad definition of what cybersecurity is. We're mostly US-based nonprofits. We use your EIN and your 990 to help verify what you do. And so an ISAC started about 25 years ago at the financial sector. Bill Clinton started as a executive order, and then it was adopted into law. And basically, it's usually a vertical, or within an industry or vertical, or regional, mostly industry-based, sharing analysis center. So like, you provide information to each other about things that are happening in your organization or your sector that helps protect other people in the sector. And so, in our organization, we might share email addresses or IPs or whatever that are threatening, or we might ask some of our vendor partners, and we're about 300 nonprofit members and about 40 vendor partners, questions about this tool or that thing we're seeing to be better secured.
So I know, this was several years ago, there was the Kaseya issue where it was a vendor who had been breached, and then all of their clients had issues. And I think there have been a couple other like that. So you would communicate that with each other, like, watch out, this thing is happening. Yeah,
or like a more recent example, but was with the CrowdStrike thing where, everybody's CrowdStrike crashed and what did you do to do it? So CrowdStrike is pretty expensive, so not an enormously popular option for nonprofits anymore. They did used to give it away free, but those days are long gone. But for those of us that did have Kaseya, they're in our community, there's a lot of like, how did you get this to work? What did you do? Because people are struggling to even get support on the line with Kaseya with CrowdStrike, because so many people are having the problem, and then nonprofits were not paying for the highest level of support typically. So there's a lot of like very specific instructions, like have them restart their computer 10 times. And on the 11th time, if it doesn't work, do this. Or, disconnect the computer from the internet and then restart it. Things like that, which were kind of manageable if you had a person at a desk that could do it. The reason why the CrowdStrike thing was so bad in some cases is there are things like signs and kiosks in airports where there's no one there to restart it 10 times. And then because I'm disconnected from the internet, remotely managing those things got really, really hard.
I would love if you want to talk just about some of the basics, but then I was really interested. We've been having some conversations at Community IT. We've had some clients contact us about what cybersecurity do they need to beef up in this day and age, like given the changes in the last month, 2 months in the environment. Do you have any advice?
I would do the basics, and that's not as basic as 1, 2, 3, but it is like a lot easier than the work that a lot of nonprofits do. And record retention, like that is not particularly hard. It doesn't make you popular as an IT person, but it's not particularly hard at a technical level or even a policy level. It's hard to communicate and roll out because people love email.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot emphasize how much people love email.
Mm-hmm.
Just let your email system crash and see how quickly you have a new job after you're an IT person.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so record retention, those are kind of the thing that keeps coming out, because we've all worked in the last, say, 5 or 10 years in an environment where cybersecurity has become increasingly more important of our job. And we kind of, as nonprofits, expected our good reputation and our good deeds protect us. And that's not true. Criminals will just commit crimes, whether it's sort of vandalizing our website or ransomware or breaking into our emails and reading what we're doing and then, doing embarrassing things with it or whatever. Um, but what is unique about this environment is in some of, at least the federal level, is that now we're concerned that like for reasons that aren't totally clear, don't make a lot of sense to me, we have more concern about at the federal level, more concern about nonprofits and being sort of subpoenaed and attacked and things. And there's a lot of embarrassing things in our email, in our messages, in our file server that are just stored and really serve no tactical or useful purpose. They have a cost to them as well. And so just delete them, right? Like come up with a process, a record retention policy process that deletes emails at a given time, whether it's, 2 weeks, which somebody was mentioning to me that they were able to did in some organizations, or 2 years. And just have a regular cycle and then have a person who's responsible to store those emails. It could be like an individual person, like if you work in a large organization that has like a librarian or an archivist, can be their job. You just give them all the things you have to store, and your operations staff, your general counsel should be able to identify things you want to store. Some of them are very obvious, like tax returns, donation records, um, corporation records, like when people are coming and going on your board, things like that.
Mhm.
Store those things, find a person to store them, whether it's an archivist, which is some places I worked have had that. Like I worked in a university where they had that, so you just shipped everything off to the archives. Or the responsible person is the person who creates that, like the CFO creates your tax records, right? And they're storing those. Um, when you're storing the records, and they need to be accessible and in an index. So that doesn't mean they have to be stored electronically. It could be in a paper file and alphabetical. That's accessible in an index. And, one thing that paper has going for it is it's literally defines history, right? Like we
Mhm.
don't, when you're talking about prehistoric times, you're talking about before things are written. Things are written on paper and we can store them for literally thousands of years, you know? You can go to the
Mhm.
Library of Congress or somewhere. So if you want to store things on paper, it's a little old school, but that's certainly an option and it's totally acceptable. And you may have things on paper that you'll just keep there. You don't need to digitize. So that's something I would definitely, that would be a place I would put my energy, and we see our members putting their energy. And I would think about like what's important to store, and again, your operations and other people can tell you that who's going to store it and for how long. The how long is usually defined by law. Like there's a minimum, like you can run an audit for up to 7 years, so keep your tax records for 7 years. Um, but the who's storing it and the why is maybe defined by your internal organizations. The who is probably, you know, keeping employment records in HR, not too complicated, or financial records in your finance office, your CFO office. Um, so yeah, I think that's a key thing. And when you are like gonna be deleting people's emails, you need to have a lot of people involved in the process, because if as an IT person, you're gonna get run out on a rail to do that.
Yeah, so you need a lot of stakeholders involved. That is so
Stakeholders.
interesting because I had not been thinking about email, but there's several, stories just in recent history of very embarrassing emails that got out, from like the Sony hack or
Yep.
from, other hacks like that. And it seems like if your nonprofit is having some kind of adversarial situation, they only need to find one jokey off-key email and they will run that out on social media and just pillory you with it. So that does maybe add a little impetus to getting people to let go of those emails because everybody loves to have their email
Yeah, and
records.
and the
But
same thing with messaging. And messaging may in some ways be a little worse because it's more flippant and faster. But the same
mhm,
policy and procedure. The good thing about messaging is you're not gonna write a long policy and announce it in your Teams or your Slack very often. You'll do that in email, but you still probably want the same rule retention record to apply. And what determines the retention of a document isn't where it's written or who it's written to. It's the content of the document determines how long it's stored for, and in some rare cases who writes it. Who writes it doesn't really typically apply to nonprofits, but like if you have somebody on your board or someone in your organization that's a public official and working in their public capacity, typically everything they write is an open record and required to be stored. It's not that unusual for a nonprofit to say have a politician on the board. And some nonprofits that are say full of politicians, like a consortium of state governors that do something, they literally don't have they don't take notes. They don't have records of their meetings other than who attended and like the agenda of the topics. They don't even see who said what, they just what the votes were. To avoid that, everything is just nothing's in writing.
So that means also you want to look at your AI acceptable use policies. So if you're using AI to take the notes on that meeting, those, and you have a policy to not keep those notes, then you'd want to make sure that everyone is aware. It sounds like also you're saying that you might want to go back over with your staff, and this is kind of an old school, like being professional, but what you communicate with your colleagues should be something that you would be okay with being public.
Yeah, I mean, and I think when I first learned this stuff, they would say like you don't want it to be on the front cover of the New York Times. Not too many people below 45 or 50 read the New York Times. So you certainly wouldn't want, conversely, you wouldn't want someone to tweet it out with hundreds of millions of followers of like this embarrassing, silly, or stupid thing you said. And there's tons and tons of example of people just saying the most ludicrous and insane things in email or in text messages or in Teams or Slack that then gets out. I mean, Sony hack, you talked about all of this stuff with Blake Lively and Justin Baldini, all the crazy things they were saying about each other and hiring people to do. Like the reason we know that they did that is because they put it in text messages, which were then subpoenaed.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that like another thing that when you're thinking about record retention that's important is it's not just worried about the sort of the lawfare thing of like, oh no, you've been subpoenaed by a congressional committee or a law firm or whatever. It could be someone nefarious breaking into your email or breaking into your messaging system and releasing the same thing.
Hmm.
Or, and this is what's happened more commonly to me in my career in IT, is like you have somebody on your board or a senior staff member who's involved in a lawsuit about something totally unrelated to your organization's day-to-day work, but then they're getting all of their emails subpoenaed. And you have to provide it all. And if there's something embarrassing in there, it could come out, and it shouldn't, but it still could. And or you may have to have a general counsel or legal counsel go through and review all the email, which is expensive and time consuming, to decide what's pertinent and what's not pertinent. And so there's just a really high cost to storing information that's quote unquote free because Google or Microsoft or whoever your email provider is gives you unlimited space to have instant messages or Slack or whatever, to have instant messages and to have email and stored everywhere. Like there's just a cost to that you don't really consider of risk. And the risk can be reputational, the risk can be, contractual, the risk can be a lot of things, but you kind of want to think that through now, and that's a really good way by like getting rid of old useless communication email files, text messages, old stuff on your file server. That's a really good way to reduce your risk surface, whether you're talking about cybersecurity, lawfare, whatever. That's a risk that you can control yourself and manage yourself, because if something embarrassing comes out that someone in your organization actually said, like that's something you could have avoided.
Hmm. We did a podcast a few months ago on needing to organize those files that are in the cloud, even though they seem like they're quote unquote free, to just keep all of them forever in kind of flat files usually. And do you really need those photos from the gala in 2011, that maybe your old board members were at? And this just feels like it gives you an extra reason to go through and just either have a blanket policy if it's before a certain time, certain year, you're just getting rid of all of it, because really, who has been back in there to look at those photos and all that time?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I did when I was at a previous job during the pandemic was we moved everything from an on-prem file server to the cloud, which was a good move. And we got and we kind of went through an exercise with each individual program that had a file share. And we asked them, if this hasn't been open or modified in 2 years, are you okay deleting it? And then we'll, we're not deleting it, but not moving it to the cloud. And if you do need it, let us know, we can move it. Or if you find out you need it over the next whatever, we have it stored, you stored them off, created an offline backup, we can pull it off. So we did that. And our research programs, our actual programs that did work, I think 14 out of 15 were fine with that. The operation programs that did like fundraising, finance for taxes, HR, they all wanted to keep theirs because they were legally required to, and it was harder for them to sort through. But I think that that sort of exercise does it. And now with more modern file storage systems like SharePoint and Google and others, you can tag and organize things such that it can be deleted too, just like an email. And I've never done that, so I don't know, but I'm sure there's people that are much smarter than me that can do that. And then those files that are just wasting space and a risk, even if it's very small out there, can be deleted.
It's hard. It goes against human nature.
Right, because it used to be like communication and storage was really hard. Like, I mean, when you think about somebody like John Adams who went off to war and the Revolutionary War and then wrote these beautiful letters to his wife about what was happening, and they're really long and be months between when they got them, and then they turned into like books and novels about him because that's how his history was recorded. That's totally different than right now. We're like I'm texting with my wife every day about things that are just in minutia because communication is basically free and information is stored at almost no cost. So we just have a plethora of information we're creating, and then we're sort of drowning in it in some ways. And we're having the opposite problem that generations ago, like trying to locate and find what's useful.
Can you talk a little bit more about kind of the basic cybersecurities that you would advise for nonprofits that maybe aren't part of your organization yet? Are there two or three basic things
Sure.
that you
So
need to
kind of
have in place?
three things you want to think about. You want to manage your identity, you want to patch your hardware and software, and you want to look out for phishing, train your staff. Um, so if you can do those three things according to the Verizon breach report, that'll save 80% of your cybersecurity problems. And then you don't have to worry about some of the really big complicated things because if you can get 80% by doing three things, why not do those three things? So managing your identity, we all know these things like don't share your passwords, store your passwords in a password manager or password locker, set up multi-factor authentication. Um, look at things like have I been pawned to see if your passwords have been released somewhere. Um, use the tools that are out there like free and low cost password lockers like Bitwarden is free, NordVPN offers stuff free to or Nord offers their password manager free to nonprofits. Um, use those out there to help protect uh, your members, your members, your stuff. Because as a nonprofit, you have a responsibility internally to your organization, but then so many of us have clients that we need to safeguard their data, and clients that like we really need are some of them. Some of our organizations are helping people that are really in need and really have had bad things happen to them or whatever, and we need to bear that responsibility very carefully. So
Or
patch your
children, they
Yeah,
have,
kids,
they
people that are sick,
do
like
education.
exactly. Kids, right. Kids that are going to rock and roll summer camp. I saw that it was one of our inciting nonprofits that I just read about. It's a member. Um, helping sick people, religious organizations, all kind of part of our community, and you have a responsibility to your clients, constituents, uh,
Volunteers.
yeah, all of them to protect their information. Um, patch your stuff, make sure you know what you have. So you need an inventory, which is again easier said than done. And by your stuff, what I mean is anything that contains information on that is your organization's information. So that may not mean just things you own. It could be like your staff's phones. It could be like not computers, like smart devices like TVs. Um, you know, your air conditioning controls. uh, a few years ago, I guess a lot of years ago, the Target was broken into because there was a problem with one of its vendors in air conditioning controls. So you kind of have to worry about all of these things a little bit. So take an inventory of what you've got. Try and set those things like your phones, your computers, whatever, to be managed and automatically run updates. And then things that can't automatically run updates, keep that inventory and revisit them and say like, okay, the TV doesn't automatically run updates, so I need to go once a month, once a quarter, once a week to run updates on the TV. Just because a device is smart, like just because you bought a smart light bulb or a smart thermostat, doesn't mean you need to connect it to the internet. And if you're not connecting to the internet, then you don't have to worry about running updates. and all these things. And when you connect these things to the internet to do cool things like have the light change colors when you shout at it, or through an app or whatever, you do need to kind of take the responsibility of the uncool things of like making sure you're running the latest version so it's not becoming part of a DDoS botnet attack thing.
Update the password so it's not
Right, exactly. Exactly. So like your door camera isn't being snooped on by somebody else and like watching all your neighbors walk by, or even worse, like a security camera that's like looking in your daycare.
hmm
So, that's designed for to what for parents to watch their kids at daycare or dogs. My sister leaves her dog in a doggy daycare and they can log into a camera and watch them. But, it wouldn't be so cool if some bad person was doing that and then taking pictures of your dog. Uh And then finally, watch out for phishing, right? About a huge percentage of, I'd have to look, but a huge percentage of cybersecurity incidents start with phishing. And phishing in sort of the most broad sense of the word, not just like email at your professional email, but texting, messages on all these different services like WhatsApp, Signal.
QR codes.
Yeah, the whole works. One thing that someone told me years and years ago about this stuff, which is kind of, I say this every time I talk about this now, is like it's not an accident that 911 isn't an email, right? People send you things with a false sense of urgency, whether it's like a salesperson, like, oh no, you're only one day left to buy this thing, or uh, a hacker, like, oh no, click on this before you lose your bank account or your access to your Easy Pass, which I got the other day, and I was just talking to my wife about it. She got the same one. Um, Very little of what you get in email is urgent. So take a second. There's a really good free uh, public service announcement that Craig Newmark for Lanesbury's and Aspen Digital have done called Pause for Nine or Pause Nine or sorry, Take Nine. You can go out there, you can download those, you can show those to your staff. Those of you in the Washington D.C. or New York area and a few other places, they have big billboards during the holiday seasons. There was one I think on New York Avenue, if I remember correctly, and in the Metro during those seasons. Um, there are a lot of good low cost, no cost resources around cybersecurity for nonprofits, and there's a lot of them for public service announcements or public education. CISA has a bunch, um, and you can use those for your staff. The one thing I'm really, really, really convinced of is that if your organization is doing amazing, cool work in teaching kids to go to rock and roll summer camp, teaching kids to play soccer to get them involved in education, giving grants to people to do stuff, that if you can do that really hard work that the private sector or government can't do, you can do cybersecurity too. It may be sort of a black box that you don't understand is a little intimidating, but start with those three things and you can fix the other stuff. And then you can build up to the more complicated stuff. But if you can get 80% done with three things, do those three things.
We talk about it too, that when you think about training your staff or making sure your staff are kind of part of your army protecting your organization, nonprofits have it a little bit easier because everyone who works for you believes in your mission, believes in what you're doing. They want to protect you. I mean, I don't know if you've had a for-profit job recently, but I know that in my past life, I had jobs where I didn't care. They were paying me and, hopefully I was doing the job I was supposed to be doing. So I think we already have a little bit farther ahead of being able to get the staff to see themselves as in their inboxes, they're protecting the organization by
Yeah, I mean,
protecting
you read a
themselves.
lot about insider threats and people doing bad things at work in an organization. And that occasionally happens with nonprofits, but it's much more common, like you're saying, with for-profit or government organizations where people are working there and they just don't care and they're annoyed at their boss or their boss's boss or what their organization does. So then they leak things or do terrible things to the
Yeah.
organization. So, but yeah, I think, like you said, these are mission-driven organizations, and part of your mission is to protect your organization. And so some of the cybersecurity stuff that happens, you can help protect by just spending a little bit of time and a little bit of thought. I think the other thing too that I think a lot about with cybersecurity, and I think a lot about cybersecurity, which is, that's what happens when it's your job and a passion. Is I think one of the things that happens with cybersecurity that's not analogous with real life security is when people are the victim of a crime in cybersecurity, they are a lot more times embarrassed or ashamed. Like if someone were to drive a big truck through the front of your organization, run through the elevator, run up to the file cabinets of your CFO's office, rifle through all the file cabinets, steal all your financial records, and then run out. That'd be on the front cover of the Washington Post if they did that in DuPont Circle where I used to work. But if someone were to break into your financial system and steal all your financial records, and maybe you didn't have multi-factor authentication set up, just like you didn't have big bollards in front of your building to stop people driving through the front door, uh, then people are like, oh, that's your fault because you didn't have MFA set up, and then some big fat Russian person did that because you're a fool. I don't think that's right, and I don't think that's fair, and I think that like if something happens to you in cybersecurity, you should be feel free to talk about it, and you should to sort of expose it, just like a lot of other crime, like sunlight is the best disinfectant, and you should feel free to come to people when these things happen, people that are in your organization to help you, people like community IT, people like the NGO ISAC, because we're here to help, right? We aren't here to belittle or make fun of you because you didn't have a good password. That happens. Like I wish I could say I've never had a cybersecurity incident or I've never had a bad thing happen to me, but it happens.
It's out there all around. I like that analogy of if someone broke into your office building, you would it would be easy to see yourself as a victim, right? You were the victim in that case. It wasn't your fault. They just came in and robbed you. But when it's in your inbox, you think, oh, well, I shouldn't have clicked on that. Like, I'm stupid. I can't believe I clicked on that. And now it's this big problem. But we do talk about making sure in your organization that you have an environment where people can tell you that they clicked on the wrong thing and aren't so embarrassed about it that they just either don't mention it to anyone or try to fix it themselves. It really is important to share that and to know who to tell.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of one of the models of the NGO ISAC or of these shared security models is like security works better when it's a team sport and when everybody shares. And so whether that's within your organization, within peer organizations, or everywhere, like I think some of these criminals prey on people because they know that it's an easy thing to do. Um, a lot of them are coming outside of the United States and then doing things to the United States, and there's no real repercussions for what they're doing in some far off place. And then it's if even if 1 in a million people do it, if you get a few $1,000s or a few $100s or whatever, then just and you're doing it at such a big scale because you have a lot of infrastructure you've stolen, and you just keep doing it. So that's another thing I think that we need to solve. I don't think the NGO ITAC can really solve it, but we as a sort of society and international organizations, it's like making criminals who commit crimes outside of your country in the cyber organizations pay, whether it's like lottery scams in places like Jamaica where I used to live, or ransomware gangs running out of Eastern Europe, or former Russia and former Soviet Union countries. Like if those criminals, if there was a price that they were paying, it would make cybercrime a lot less likely.
Yeah. Well, and I think we've noticed that a lot of nonprofits now in this environment are a lot more worried about, maybe getting doxxed or being attacked for an advocacy stand that they take, or even just the work that they do. But I think you're still far more likely to be the victim of a crime. Like people are trying to break into your systems to get your
I
money.
mean, the most common type of internet crime is, business email compromise, where someone breaks into your email or breaks into a vendor's email and like sends you an email and then says like, "Oh, I'm your printer vendor," and there's one letter off from your printer vendor's name. Your $5,000 bill for your quarterly printing costs need to go to this new bank account, and they send it to a person who's really busy and not really thinking, and it looks exactly the same because they broken into the printer vendor's email or someone's email, and you send it, and then now you're out $5,000.
Yeah.
So that is the most common type of internet crime that businesses are exposed to, and those businesses include uh, nonprofits, and it's the most costly too, a lot more costly in total than ransomware, for example. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but if you look on the FBI's website, it talks about IC3, which is the FBI's internet crime reporting, And one thing I do have to say, we just had a briefing. We have weekly briefings about 2 weeks ago with the FBI. One thing I do have to say is that if you are the victim of BEC, go immediately to the FBI. If you report it within 72 hours, they say they have an 80% recovery rate with your money. So report it to the local police, report it to the FBI, and report it to your bank. And then hopefully with 80% certainty, you can get your money back.
That's great. That is great to know. And I think with all of this, like if you put these cybersecurity protections in place, then you will protect yourself from wire fraud,
Yeah.
phishing, email compromise, and also from any other attacks that you might be facing.
Right. And it doesn't need to be a new expensive tool or new person or something. It could just be a simple process like if someone requests to one of your accounts payable people or one of your people that signs a contract, we need to change where the payment is going, then verify it offline, meaning don't reply back to the email that you got or the WhatsApp message you got. Call them from the number you found on their website, not on the email you just got, and say like, Ian, I see that NGO ISAC has a new PO box that I should be sending our check to for your dues. Can you confirm that PO box?
Yeah.
Sure. Here's the PO box.
And that's not expensive.
Right, that's not expensive, but that can save like even if you, and speaking from personal experience, even if you send a small check accidentally somewhere, there's the cost of that check, and then there's the cost of like investigating it, reporting it to your board, reporting it to your auditor, rejiggering your processes to do those sorts of things. And these things are really, really, really common. And
Yeah.
they happen to not just like small nonprofits. Google and Apple were victims of a huge BEC scam where someone set up a website that looked like the people that make screens for their phones and then sent them invoices saying, you ordered 10 million screens. And it was a guy in Germany, and then they wrote 2 or 3 checks for millions of dollars before they realized what had happened and that they had written it to the wrong everything. And so again, back to my earlier point, you don't want to be embarrassed or ashamed about these things, but you do want to do better. And one of the ways you can do better is by communicating that within your organization, within peer organizations, and to law enforcement and others. And that like you learn from these things, right? Like everybody makes mistakes. We all had to fall off our bike before we could ride I don't know, however far you ride your bike when you're riding your bike far. Um, And it's important to learn from the mistakes you make and to, make small mistakes. You don't make big mistakes.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time today, Ian. This was just so helpful, I think, to our audience. And I know I learned a lot, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to do it. And for your audience out there that are nonprofits, please apply to join the NGO ISAC. You can do it from our website. There's a link on the top of every page. We're happy to have conversations about how we can help you with cybersecurity. It's a community of peer organizations that are here to help each other.
And what is the website? Is it
And
spelled out?
yeah, ngoisac.org, and just click the join me link, and that'll get you started in our membership pipeline.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Ian.
Thank you guys. Have a good day.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.